On this week's Bet the Process podcast, we have a somewhat Rufus-less podcast. Rufus and I have a discussion for a bit. We talk a little Survivor, talk a little trip through college, and then we have a brand new guest on. His name is Robert Greer, and he has definitively solved the whether Shanahan is a choker conversation. So with that, let's start the process. Welcome to another episode of the Bet the Process podcast, where Rufus is in Vegas at G2E, and we have been experiencing a logistical nightmare to film this for all of you seven, but because we love you so much, we're making it happen. So, Rufus, how was your dinner last night? You're social, you're busy. You got everything going on. Describe to us a little bit of what the life of Rufus is at G2E and explain to us what G2E is. Even you may not be the best person to represent what G2E is, because to you, it's probably just hanging out with friends and going to dinner and playing golf. But
I mean, that's correct. I haven't actually gone to the conference yet.
what is the conference? Tell us, enlighten our
Well,
seven listeners.
well, don't you want to know how I got here?
I would assume you got here by plane.
I did. I haven't been that I've been out on the West Coast for the last like 2 weeks. I was in LA. I was in LA about 2 weekends ago shooting something for masterclass, and then I went to Denver where I saw our good friend Peter Jennings and stayed with him for a night, and I got to be Peter Jennings recording about the process last week. And then I went up to Aspen because Peter is an investor in this company called Amalfi. And they threw this, it's their first event, this wellness retreat. So it's kind of connecting entrepreneurs with ex-athletes. And it was a really, really fun experience. So I was there in Aspen for 3 days and then headed to Vegas. So that's where I am now for the Global Gaming Expo. And
That's what
the Gaming
G2E stands
Expo
for,
is
huh?
just a conference. It's like a huge conference and trade show with basically every company in the gaming world there. So this isn't just sports betting. Sports betting is a very small piece of it. It's, people that make slot machines, like, all sorts of, it's the entire gaming industry, not just sports betting.
Why do you think that why has it become such an important thing for sports betting? Because like broadly speaking, like my perception, like when you walk on the floor of G2E, I mean, when I worked at Duetto, which was the hotel revenue management company, we used to go to G2E because we would sell to casinos. And so, like again, like the actual idea that sports betting is an important part of G2E, like I feel like someone made that up. Like why do you think that that's the case?
I think it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, Jeff. I think when you have all the sports betting companies there and all the payment processors and basically anybody that's even tangentially affiliated with sports betting in the same place, that it's not about the presentations, the seminars, whatever. It's about the network and the networking, and deals get done.
So from your perspective as a sports bettor, professional sports bettor, sorry, alleged professional sports bettor, we're not sure if you win or not. We, what is the most, how would you rank the different events that you go to these days? And I guess we're talking about like Bet Bash, we're talking about Sloan, we're talking about G2E. Is there anything else I mean, I guess you go to your advantage, the thing that Will puts on. So that's pretty exclusive though.
Okay, so for me, the ordering would be the AP Summit is the one that is the can't miss one for me first off. AP Summit's number one. I'd still say Sloan's number two, because Sloan, I connect with so many interesting people that are not just sports bettors, but people in the sports analytics world there. And I'd say Bet Bash is number three, and G2E is number four if we're talking just sports betting.
But in the first example of Sloan, are you saying you find that the most interesting more than the other two because of your own intellectual curiosity or because it helps you in your business?
I think my own intellectual curiosity and the connections I've made from that maybe aren't even as important for my betting, but just people I've met over the years through that.
Okay, so for
From a person.
an aspiring professional sports bettor,
Well,
what is the advice that you would give in terms of leveraging the events? And there are a bunch of other events now too.
like,
Obviously, there's, I think Carnegie Mellon has a sports analytics
yeah,
event
they do.
now, and Wharton has had one in the past. I don't know if they still do. And
Well, the Warden
um,
had the People Analytics Conference, which I always found really, really interesting.
again, what I'm asking, and yeah, shout out to Cade and the work that he does. But what I'm asking is because I think we do have aspiring professional sports bettors that listen to this podcast for them. What is what's your advice on leveraging all of these different events and which ones to go to and all that kind of stuff?
Well, I would think about what your role is in the industry, what role you want to play. Are you an originator? Are you building models, or do you want to be more of the sort of top-down better? I think if you want to be a top-down better, that's basically what Bet Bash is, a conference for top-down betters. I'll be honest. Like, I don't think if you're an originator, you're really going to gain a lot there, except networking and trying, maybe if you're trying to find accounts. But I don't think you're going to learn much in terms of helping your actual your betting as much. Whereas I think I've gotten a lot of really great ideas at Sloan and met a lot of really smart people that are sort of in that same sort of subfield, I guess.
Hmm.
So I guess that's, yeah, I'm gonna say Sloan's better if you're an originator. Bet Bash is better if you're not.
Right. Got it. Okay. How if you're an
But
originator,
at the same time, if you're an originator and you're at Bet Bash, you can like you can find accounts, but it's I don't feel like I'm going to learn as much in terms of the really upping my game. It's more just helping me logistically, I guess. It's what Bet Bash can do.
have you ever been to any of those events in New York? I think it's like the SBC or whatever
Yeah, the
sport.
SBC Americas,
Yeah.
the
Where
sports
would
bet.
you rank those?
I'd say they're around where G2E is to
Right.
me.
So industry
These are
conferences
just
really
big
don't have as
conferences.
much. Yeah.
They're big industry conferences. I mean, I think they're useful in building connections and networking,
Yeah.
which is basically what most all of these conferences are for. You're just it's a much wider net. Is that the way to describe it? With something like the SBCs. I mean, because you're dealing with, it's not like Bet Bash is great because it's basically just betters. Sloan is great because it's sports analytics people. SBC is like industry people. So you're going to get people that work for casinos, like work for payment processors, work for data providers, all those types of things. And so, if you see your role being on the casino side, or I should say on the operator side, or tangentially related to that, I would say the SBC, G2E, those are probably far more valuable for you.
Okay. Switching gears. At Troon, we had one of our big launches this week. We launched our first really for pay product, which is essentially a subscription product to Troon courses that allows you to get a discount 15% off every time you play a Troon course, and then also gives you access to last minute inventory that is cheaper theoretically. So inside of 78 hours, there's up to 50% discounting at courses. So
That's incredible.
less, yeah,
Congratulations, Jeff.
thanks. If you want to go there and check it out, it's at troon.com/access because it's called the Access and the Access Plus memberships or subscriptions. Yeah, yes, Rufus.
Can I ask what the process for you was like of developing this program? Because I think, for me, I don't come from the corporate world at all, and it's not.
We're very aware of that,
I'd be
given
interested to
how
see
difficult it was to schedule this
how did you
podcast.
think about it?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of how do you think about these things? in this case, we were inheriting a 27-year-old program called the Troon Card, which was an incredible program, but were sort of born in a slightly different era of golf where demand, which was much more important to stimulate, meaning like that, especially that last minute demand. What we believe is that last minute demand and specifically last minute booking can be eased and stimulated by better like marketing and better, better awareness that tee times are available or better targeting, right? Marketing is all about connecting the right person with the right product at the right time. And there are many people like yourself that are typically playing golf or planning to play golf, a day in advance, 7 hours in advance, and whatnot. And we don't necessarily need to give you a discount for that, right? We just need to make you aware that a tee time's available. Like if we hit you with the tee time, like if we hit you with the tee time 4 times at say Las Vegas National or whatever, is that the place you play last minute? Like,
Yeah.
and one of those times you're gonna be like, oh, actually, I have an open afternoon. I'm gonna go play, and you'll go click on that and play. And it isn't so much about it being cheap. Maybe it's about it not being as expensive as say Win, but like that the idea is that marketing automation in golf is important and needs to move forward as a way to help golf courses stimulate demand and as a way to actually like help golfers play more.
What about, so for me, if I got a notification that a tee time was available there, but it was like the one tee time left and the course is booked solid, I'd be less interested than if I got a notification that basically nobody's there.
Right.
I'm going to be able to get
Well,
a quick.
so I think one of the things that we believe is important is to create what we were like calling the private club experience. What's interesting is I think over the years people have like focused on the private club experience to mean like exclusive access to exclusive clubs. And the reality is that's not what people necessarily care about. It's not like Cyprus is giving out, tee times to randoms because they happen to be a member at, Omaha Country Club or something like that. This idea of reciprocal play across private clubs is not necessarily the answer in my mind, at least. And the answer is more, what is that experience? And that experience is playing with people slash like that you enjoy playing with. And it's playing around that is, some people think it's fast. Some people probably think it's not rushed. Some people think it's at that right pace. Like I've got to the point now where if I can play a 4 hour round, which I consider to be not necessarily fast or not necessarily slow, but I don't really ever feel rushed and I don't ever really feel like I'm waiting. That's kind of like ideal for me because I can kind of play at my pace. I like to play fast. Obviously, if I play like a 3:15 round, I feel like I've, accomplished something major and I should get a ribbon or a star. But like, um, yeah, anyways, I think one of the things that Win does well is because they space their tee times 20 minutes apart, you do get that feeling of just like you're kind of at your own pace and you're at your own club and it's great. Like you never have to really wait. And it is expensive, but it is actually like does create the feel of being at a private club while not being a private club. So I think the answer would be eventually, yes. I think what we would want to try to do is understand your preferences better and tell you, like, hey, the tee sheet's wide open. Come play, right? Like that would mean a lot to you.
It would.
And what would actually be even more interesting would be, if we could charge you more for a guaranteed, pace of play or a guaranteed experience, whether people would be willing to pay for that. I think that the challenge is that in golf, like there's only ever been one cohort that's been identified as as a cohort that people can target, and those are value seekers, people that really want discounts. Like Golf Now as a company really focuses on sort of discounts, and a
But
lot of the
it's a tee time
local,
aggregator though, too. That's what I use it for.
yeah, well,
Right. Like rather than
it's the only tee time aggregator, and ultimately, like we believe that we can be a tee time aggregator certainly across Troon courses. Which even where you are in New York, there's a reasonable amount. The Dobbs Ferry one is us, and the Centennial is us, and there's a few up in Westchester. we used to have a few in Vegas. We don't have quite as many in Vegas anymore, but like in Arizona, Scottsdale, we have like 32. We have like True North and Quintero and a bunch of other courses. Then we have a bunch in San Diego. So we have a lot of really good courses. We have Kapalua, the event they're playing this week, Black Desert. That's one of our courses. So actually, I was going to ask you for some Black Desert, some picks in Black Desert, so I can have something to sweat.
That's interesting. I mean, that course looks very interesting. It's
Yeah,
built.
we can go play there. We should actually go do a Black
Of course.
Desert trip. Maybe this year, post college basketball, assuming we have a great college basketball season. I'll take you guys to Black Desert, you and Tom and Taylor.
I got to play a PGA Tour course this past weekend that actually is going to be hosting the event next week.
Which one?
TBC Summerlin.
Oh, okay.
Which was interesting with our friend John from FanDuel. But what was interesting is that I never played a course that hosts a PGA Tour event in like when there was grandstands up, like right before.
Yeah.
I'm kind of surprised there was still play. I mean, there was not a lot of play going on there, but there was.
It's kind of fun though, right? It's kind of fun to see it all. Yeah.
It's fun having the grandstands there. And I was like, I could just hit it off the grandstand here and just take my temporary immovable object relief.
Yeah, Silverado is that way. Like I've played Silverado a few times before, like right before, like the day they closed Silverado. I think the last 2 years I've played pretty close to the day they closed Silverado for the tournament. So that's a pretty fun experience.
It is funny that when you play a course that hosts professional events without the grandstands, it doesn't look the same. Like playing Royal St. George's, I'm like, well, the holes are framed so differently.
Can we talk about Survivor?
Yeah, but first, wait, I wanted to ask one more question on the Troon stuff. And how do you go about validating, like, let's try a 10% discount here, or like
I mean, I think ultimately you can test things via surveys or focus groups or things like that. You can test things via landing pages and advertisements. But you really don't know until you sort of get these things into the wild and look at what the analytics look like. Right now,
Are you doing any A/B testing then?
We will. We're not right now because we just literally got this thing out the door, but we will do A/B testing for sure. I mean, that's a big part of any, web-based system is you have the opportunity to do A/B testing. So yes, we will do that eventually. Okay, can we talk about Survivor? I'm kind of dying to talk about it.
Yeah, I know. I mean, Jeff, you're one of two people left in the out of the 115 people that started.
I know. And I know who I'm picking this week. I know I'm picking this week because he cannot pick them.
Yeah. And I knew that nobody else could pick the 49ers this week. And they had a 13-point lead. I was feeling like
good process, poor outcome, right? That was like you picked the team that had and their future value as the Niners was not nearly as high as you would think because, like I said, I looked through that and it looked like they weren't going to be used for another 7 or 8 weeks. And that was the reason that they became much more like desirable this week was because of how poorly that Arizona had played against Washington, who now looks like arguably the best offense in the league, right? I mean, they like you laugh, but they look really good. And like our friend Judah, who we had on last week, I read his newsletter on Sunday morning, which I encourage everyone to read because so many of the things he talked about in that newsletter were correct. And one of the things that he talked about was that Cleveland had been having all sorts of mix-ups in the secondary, and that wasn't going to play well against Washington, and that had happened. He also talked about how he thought that both Jacksonville and Indy were going to be able to get kind of explosive plays and get down the field. And so I bet the over there, and I think that game had 80 points scored in it or something close to that. So definitely worth a read it comes out early Sunday morning, so worth a read if you want to put a little extra stuff on. But sample size of one time.
How good that podcast with Judah was. I thought he was fantastic.
He was very good, and we took a very good angle on things, which I thought was interesting. I'm working on the charity for you because you now owe me $1,000 charity donation, which I think it may be hurricane relief at this point. I mean, it's
Yeah.
topical. It's kind of like the thing, but let me think more. I also would love to shout out to my friend Craig Breslow's Strike Three Foundation, which is for pediatric cancer relief. But now that he's GM of the Red Sox, I'm not sure how much he's working on that. So maybe I'll text him and see if he's doing that. And then, anyways, what were you saying? You had a finger up.
Oh, before I was just, on the Survivor thing, the fact that there's only 4 entries left means future value does not mean nearly as much.
Oh, fair
Because
point. No, well,
it's
that was
it's
kind of what I was getting to was that their value would have been way later, and with only 4 teams left, no one's getting there.
exactly. Exactly. I should have been listening to you, Jeff, rather than having Shanny put in my fanny.
Shanny. So we are going to have a little Shanny conversation with the guests, which unfortunately Rufus is not going to be able to be a part of because he's a social butterfly. Why don't we do a quick trip through college, Rufus, and then we can bring in our guest because it's always fun to do a trip through college on a Wednesday morning.
You love a trip through college,
I
Jeff.
do love a trip through college. How did you guys do last week in
Don't tell your
college?
wife that.
How did you guys do last week in college?
I think we were down a
Oh,
few.
by the way, I can't believe we haven't even talked about the Orioles. I guess it's been like a week or almost a week or not even a week. So
It's been wow. I mean, let's maybe briefly touch on it. I was
sure.
like literally, I thought it was some of the worst in-game managerial decision making I'd seen by Brandon Hyde. I mean, first off, the Orioles team, like, yes, they continued their lack of vibes and no energy, and just like the last 3 months haven't seemed like they're having fun. And I'm gonna be honest, I don't like them bringing Brandon Hyde back. I mean, I just feel like at some point that has to be a reflection of the manager and the culture, and that's because the manager doesn't do that much. Culture is a big part of it, and I know that Hyde is open to making analytics based moves, and that's something that the Orioles front office likes, and it's something I like. But the move of bringing in your best reliever to start the 5th inning and letting him only face 3 batters, he got 2 outs, just didn't make a lot of sense to me. And I do think when you decide to parade your entire bullpen in through a game, and when you're down 1-0 in the middle innings, the likelihood that one of these guys that you bring in a high leverage situation is not going to have his best stuff is pretty high.
So
You know,
the
and
counter to
then
that,
B,
Rufus,
wait,
because I
and
saw
then
you. Go ahead.
and B is that eventually you're going to run out of arms. And I guess you could say, well, we'd rather run out of arms and be in the game than not be in the game and have fresh arms. It's like you don't want to replay of the Zach Britton game in 2016, the wild card, where the Orioles famously did not use their best pitcher and the best relief pitcher in baseball, Zach Britton, in an extra inning game because there wasn't a save situation. But you don't want to run out of pitchers and then have like a Cade Povich pitching in the 9th inning in a high leverage situation. I mean, I think that it made, in my opinion, the way they were using the bullpen made the non-inclusion of Albert Suarez on the wild card roster more of a head scratcher. And I know they started him on Sunday, and we're hoping he would be pitching if they made it to the divisional round. But he's been better as a starter than a reliever this year. But at the same time, I was literally, it was the 6th inning and they had pitched like 5 pitchers in the last 2 innings at that point.
Yeah, I mean, the counter to this is we know the data shows that the first time through a lineup, you're the best, right? So if you can get every single pitcher with a slight advantage, meaning he's blowing through 1 inning and he can throw harder and whatnot, you're putting you're putting your best foot forward, right?
Well, I mean, with relievers, that's not an issue. I mean, no relievers going and facing guys twice.
Right, but again, the reason that relievers are why it's so much easier to be a starter than a reliever is because you only have to face hitters. You got to blow through them one. And I'm just
Relievers are
telling you,
sprinters.
I'm telling you, there is an analytics argument that supports doing what Brandon Hyde did. What's that?
Relievers are sprinters.
Okay.
starting pitchers are distance runners or middle distance, right? I mean, guys that switch from starters to relievers will throw harder. You can throw harder in shorter spurts. Most, not all.
Right.
That's so to me though, it was yes, they were getting very matchup-y early on, and they've always been very strong on the platoon advantage. And I like that. But at the same time, I also do think um pulling Coulomb after 3 batters faced when he's been by far your best reliever this year is it just didn't make much sense to me at all. To Jacob Webb, who then walked like 2 guys, and I had PTSD from seeing Jacob Webb give up like 7 runs in like an inning during the wild card series last year. I mean, he gave up like a grand slam and then another homer, and basically like we were toasting game 1 because of him. And then it looked like I was like, oh my God, Jacob Webb, playoff Jacob Webb is back.
Okay. Seems like we're not going to have a chance to do a trip through college now then.
Do a short trip through college, right?
Okay, let's do it.
What's up?
Um,
Oh, there was a game yesterday. I don't know if I won it or not. I did win it. Yay. It was Florida International against Liberty. I didn't realize we were at Tuesday football already.
oh, you liked FIU in that game, I assume?
Yeah, we started off the week on a 1-0. That's nice
There
to
you
know.
go. You moved it. That moved, right? That moved from like you probably got it like 17.5 or something.
We got it at 17.5. You're right.
Nailed it.
Let's
I
see.
got it at 16, so I won.
Nice.
Yeah. Got the worst of it though.
Okay, we like Arizona State at home against Utah. We took that at 6.5. Not sure, but it looks like the line 6 at the moment.
Six. It's a
Still like
six,
it
yeah.
at 6. Another team that this one moved as well, actually, that I've been on a lot this year. Can you guess who it is? New
California
member? Yeah.
+3. What'd you get them at?
The Fighting Jack Nicklaus's. I got them at plus combination +4 and +3.5. Still
There's
like it
probably
+3, but I mean that's one of our big edge of the week. You know, an interesting one to me that I've played a little bit is the Vanderbilt Kentucky game. I just think this is like the mother of all letdown spots. If there's a such thing as a letdown spot, this has to be it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
you guys like Kentucky or no? You must like Vanderbilt, right?
no, right. I mean, yes.
You're betting against the letdown spot.
Well, that's why I didn't really go hard on it, and I just took 14s. But I wouldn't play it at 13.5. I don't know how much to say that that's worth, but I think it has to be worth something and something substantial.
Yeah.
So, you know me, I'm like, I'm not a big situational handicapper overall because it's very hard.
That is a situation.
But this is one where I think it is a situation that.
But don't you think that that's going to be
like,
very, very built into the line, and therefore, like, if there's going to be value in this game, it's going to be on Vanderbilt.
Well, that line, I mean, if you look at where it opened, I think it opened. Let me actually pull this up and see where Circa opened it. I believe it moved pretty strongly towards Kentucky. So it's 13 now. Circa opened it at 10.
Wow.
And so I was okay at that point taking a 14. It's now 13. I wouldn't take it at 13.
It's 13.5 on Chris.
13 at Circa.
Yeah.
Another interesting one that I have not played is the NC State game. I think the reason I've not played that is Grayson McCall got carted off last week. Their quarterback, the guy that was Coastal Carolina quarterback last year. He was their stud quarterback, and NC State's been so bad this year. It's been kind of like they were supposed to be a very good team, and they've just been like complete garbage.
Yeah, hot garbage, some would say.
Yeah, so I'm not actually playing that just because of the injury situation there.
Seems like a significant injury.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the backup has gotten a bunch of playing time because McCall has been injured already this year, but but he's not a very highly ranked recruit. Let's go a little more.
Give us one more, Rufus.
Okay. I like Florida getting 15.5 at Tennessee.
There we go. The bounce back or the letdown. That's the key there, right?
Yeah. Who's bounce back for Tennessee, you mean?
Yeah, bounce back for
Let
Tennessee.
down from Florida from the big game against UCF. Somehow I think that I don't see that being a letdown spot going into Tennessee.
Yeah, it's true. All right. That's our trip through college. And we're going to welcome our guest in and we're going to welcome Rufus out. So talk to you guys in a second. We now welcome in Robert Greer to the Beth the Process podcast. I didn't even ask if I could use your real name or if that was your real name. I'm assuming it is.
Yeah,
If not, it's your real name. So now we can look you up and Google you and all that shit.
yeah, that's I mean, I think you could probably figure it out just from my handle and profile picture.
So Rufus sent me this sort of work that you were doing, solving the ultimate question of whether Shanahan is a bad in-game coach and whether he costs his team wins. So that's kind of like what got you on our radar, and obviously was interested in talking a little bit about that, and we can talk about that in a second. Before we do that, like, would love to hear about what got you into this world, because after he sent it to me, spent a little time on your Twitter, went to your website, saw some of the research you were doing, and it piqued my interest. And given that we've been having like new guests on, and there's sort of this new breed of, I think, really smart football analysts that are kind of like breaking down the NFL with analytics, film all together. My guess coming from places outside of traditional football analysis, but now all of a sudden getting a platform because of Twitter and the web, etc. Anyways, that's a long-winded way of me asking, like, hopefully you're one of those people, because it would be bad if you weren't and you were on the podcast.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of ways, yes, right? So doing all the analytics and the data and all that stuff, certainly. I think if you look at the stuff that I'm interested in, which is really NFL sides, probably a little different than some of the other guests that you have who are looking for doing it more for the edge and for winning. And obviously NFL sides are not the best place to do that. It's such a hard market. And so for me, it's really more about the modeling challenge and the data challenge of trying to find an edge in that market. That's what interests me the most. This is, not my full-time job. So that kind of grants you the luxury of not having to, play some of the markets that are more beatable, for lack of a better word. So that's probably where I differ the most from your average guest, is I'm not like, looking for every edge. It's really, I'm looking for all edges that could be used for NFL sides, because I'm really trying to predict NFL games as accurately as I possibly can. But in terms of all of the, data science or analytics, then yeah, it's probably pretty similar to the average guest that you have on. My field is in data, and a lot of my background is in the tech world, doing analytics, strategy, operations, and stuff like that. So it lends itself to modeling pretty well.
Give me an example job you've had or the job you have now, because that's obviously like, I've done a fair amount in that world. And so finding people that are inclined in that world, but also like are really interested in beating sports, is always like the holy grail. Like that excites me as an individual.
Yeah, so my current industry is venture capital. So I work at a fund and do all of our data. You guys were actually talking a couple weeks ago with Nate Silver about that space, and so there was some interesting stuff that you guys talked about, particularly about how hard data is in that field, and it's actually not dissimilar from the NFL in a lot of ways, where there is it's very messy, right? There's not a lot of these, it's not a big data set. There's not a lot of like machine learning models you can build to predict certain things. You have to disentangle a lot of stuff that's like unknown. And I think we're going to talk about some of the Shanahan stuff in a bit. And I would say like that's a really good example of where you have entanglement in the NFL, where it's very hard to separate what's going on. You can observe stuff and you can prioritize your time, or you can make decisions around what you observe. But in terms of predicting the future, or making a definitive statement on something, it's actually quite difficult. So there's definitely some overlap there in terms of what I focus on now. But before getting into this world, I worked at a couple of startups, two marketplace businesses. One was Affirm, which is the consumer lending, and then the other one was helping launch Uber Eats. And so I did a lot of work in the analytics space, basically using the data that we had to better manage those marketplaces, whether that's pricing policies. For Uber Eats, it was building an algorithm to set delivery distances for restaurants and optimizing things for both, conversion of users, but then also for the economics of doing those deliveries.
Interesting. And I just stalked you on LinkedIn, so congratulations on the big upset this week.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's funny. Everyone's like, "Oh, you beat the number one team," and I'm like, "Yeah, that's cool." But I think actually the cooler thing is that we beat Alabama, which is the most surprising part about it, because Alabama is just destroys us every year.
So that was more meaningful than I guess it was. You can't really separate it because they were the number one team. So it's interesting because you obviously did not listen to this podcast yet because it has not aired, but we do have a discussion on Vanderbilt this week because they're 13.5-point underdogs against Kentucky. And I think the circle line opened at 10, went up to 14. Rufus said he bet it at 14. It's come down to 13.5. So do you think this is going to be a letdown spot for that? I mean, it's obviously there's a letdown, but like, there's that price in the market. Are you a buyer of Vandy plus 13.5 or a seller?
Well, I will say I don't really focus on football, on college football, in terms of pricing stuff out. So this is just purely my gut being a Vandy fan, but they do have a tendency to disappoint. I mean, this isn't the first season where we had a good beginning and beat some quality teams. Obviously, no one as good as number one ranked Alabama, but we do have a tendency to disappoint. So I don't know. I don't know. I have a feeling we're going to embarrass ourselves. I hope not, but
okay, let's move on to the NFL and what you said about trying to beat NFL sides. I noticed that you have a model. Your model is picking against the spread. I saw that you ranked yourself against some other models that are picking against the spread. And you were the number one model right now through what, 4 weeks or whatever, 5 weeks in terms of picking against the spread. So let's just assume there's something significant there. But let's just say my question to you is, where do you think you get your alpha from in betting NFL sides?
I think it comes from just stacking all these very, very small potential edges, right? And I say potential because it's very hard to know if you actually have one, right? There's so much there's so much luck involved, right? You need to do this for years and years and years to be able to say that you have an edge. And even when you observe your edge over that period, you don't know that it's going to perpetuate into the future, especially with a market like NFL sides. But when I do look at my performance, especially from like a CLV perspective, it does look like there is some sort of edge there, especially against opening lines. And I think that comes from just modeling out every single conceivable dynamic about what might influence the outcome of an NFL game, and doing that as best as I can, and then putting it all together into one model that makes predictions. So when I started doing this, it was just a simple ELO model. I used a lot of what 538 was doing, and just made some tweaks that I thought made sense. So like one of those, for instance, is in their original model, a team would only improve in rankings if they won, and they could only decrease in rankings if they lost, because they were balancing it around this like 0 point. That's how they determined if a team should go up and down, right? So one of the first things that I did was, let's actually normalize that against the spread. And so did you exceed expectation, or did you fall against expectation? And so like just that small tweak gave a little bit of a little bit of prediction accuracy, right? But then I, have just moved on to other things, spent a lot of time doing home field advantage and trying to model out all the different changes over time and being able to predict where it's going to go. But then also adding different dynamics that might influence that, right? So a big one that I don't see a lot in other people's home field advantage models is like divisional games. Those are always tighter. And you need to compress the amount of home field advantage that you're layering in a divisional game. Another one is like field surface familiarity. That is actually as big of a dynamic in the data that I've looked at than something like a bye. And even on something like a bye, if you look at who benefits from that, it's asymmetric between the away team and the home team. So oftentimes you see people say, "Oh, a bye is worth X many points." Well, it's worth more for an away team than it is for a home team. So just like trying again to model that as best that I can, just as an individual system, how accurate can we get at modeling out home field advantage, and then take that and put it into the model. And so I think if you do that over as many problems as you can identify, then those are going to stack into a more predictive model.
Do you do any bottoms up modeling, specifically around things like player injuries or like replacements? Like if you think about the impact of Drake May playing this week, we talked about the Patriots.
Mhm.
I'm in a survivor pool, about the process survivor pool. There's only 2 of us left. And, I'm thinking about taking Houston because the other guy can't take Houston because he already played with them. Obviously, a lot would tell you that, betting against a quarterback in their first game of this situation is probably a pretty sound choice. But how do you think about those types of impacts, especially given, like if you think about the weakness of Rufus's model, right? Like he doesn't have a lot of player specific stuff in there or injury specific stuff in there, which causes, like some people that we know to kind of like laugh at what he does. And what's great is I know he won't listen to this podcast, so I can make fun of him all I want because he's not on it right now. But if how do you think about modeling individual player interactions? Even like one of the things that worries me a little bit about Houston is, they have Nico Collins. We learned last week how important sort of the strong link system is, that wide receiver that can get open every play. And they also may not have Joe Mixon, and their running attack has been much weaker with no Joe Mixon. So is that a reason to stay away? Anyways, all of that is being said, like, how do you think about those things when you model?
Yeah, that's the hard part about adding player dynamics is actually data availability, in my opinion. Getting reliable like injury information is not easy to do programmatically. And everything that I'm doing, I want it to be programmatic, so I can do a lot of back testing, and I can extend that data set as far back as I can. So the only player element that is added into mine are the QB changes. And so it's another model where you're trying to model quarterback performance and predict that as best as possible, and then use that as an input into this broader ensemble model for predicting NFL games. And so for quarterbacks, I again I'm borrowing a lot of stuff from 538 here, but they stopped doing their model and I was using that. And so I needed to actually replicate it so that I could have that data set to use these quarterback adjustments moving forward. And so I took their model and made some changes to it to make it a little bit more accurate. But I do use that to do quarterback adjustments. And so, I didn't look at the rating difference between Brissett and May. But like whatever the delta is in their rating will get incorporated into the overall power rating for the teams in the matchup, and then that will be translated into a spread. But again, that goes back to one of the first things that we mentioned about this like entanglement in NFL data, which is I think probably harder to handle in the NFL than most other sports. because it's the ultimate team game, right? And so if you look at modeling quarterback performance, so much of it is contingent on the surrounding team. And when I say so much, I don't mean that you can't model a quarterback's play, but how much of the team's output or the passing game output is purely a function of the quarterback. And one of the interesting things that I think is relevant here is when I've looked at how backups perform relative to expectation of the model and also relative to expectation against the spread. Really good quarterbacks, their backups tend to do better than expected, and their backups tend to beat the spread. And conversely, when you have a really bad quarterback who gets benched for performance, or maybe they go out because of injury, their backup does worse than you would expect. And so what that says to me is that there is a big team element that's not always being fully accounted for in either our assessments of how good a quarterback is, from like a modeling perspective or from a stats perspective, but then also from the market. They assume if an incredible quarterback goes down, that their backup is going to be a huge downgrade. But that backup is stepping into a team that produced really good performance for another quarterback. And so their performance is actually going to be better than you might expect. And so for the Patriots, the thing that really worries me is, yeah, a rookie quarterback is probably going to be a downgrade just as is, but also look at Brissett's performance on this team relative to his performance on other teams, and he's already taking a step back. So that says to me that this current Patriots roster is, not great. I don't think that that's a controversial thing to say. And so you're putting
Shakespeare was a really good writer too.
yeah.
Yeah.
So you're putting a quarterback who already should have a pretty low rating on because he's a rookie into inarguably a bad situation. So I'm not super hopeful there. But it's hard to say how the market generally is expecting him to perform, because I think I've seen a lot of stuff written about how bad this Patriots team is. So I think that the expectations are not that high.
How do you, when you think about the work that you do, which is really like the opposite of, in some respects, it's the opposite of this direction we've been going in on this podcast recently. We've been kind of going into these somewhat unknowable things where, like you're not trying to model it all perfectly. You're just trying to like be directionally correct, and you're trying to have some way of figuring that out. What you're doing is kind of the opposite, where you're kind of you're trying to create large data sets and create structured data that helps you answer all these kind of like somewhat unknowable questions better than other people do. How do you think about non-stationarity as you think about this with the product like the NFL that is constantly changing because of rule changes and coordinators changing how we had the whole too high thing that we thought had completely changed scoring forever, and it seems like scoring's back recently. So like how do you think about balancing trying to get as large a data set as possible with worrying about these things being non-stationary?
Yeah, this is actually a question that I've run into before, and where I've generally shaken out on it is when you have a super noisy data set, or where the signal is not super clear, having more data to smooth things out is relatively better than keeping that data super current, right? So anytime you try to control for what you think is a change, you're tossing data, right? And so, maybe another kind of similar example to this is something like garbage time. If you've tried to work with garbage time and control for garbage time, you have this, immediate intuition that like, hey, if a team is up by a lot or down by a lot, let's toss that data, right? If they're down by 10, let's toss it. Down 10% win probability, let's toss that. And what you find is that there is still signal in that data. It just kind of progressively gets less and less useful as you go down to those tails. And so the answer is really not to toss a bunch of it, but maybe downweight it. And even then, you're not going to toss that much of it, right? If you are trying to control for garbage time, you're not chopping off like 20% on each end. You are chopping off like 5% tops. Because having more data is really the most valuable thing in these situations, I have found.
Interesting. All right, let's move on to the subject that brought you on here, Shanahan.
Shanahan. Yeah.
Let's talk about Shanahan. So Rufus and and I think what Rufus has always generally, the reason he is annoyed about me about this is he thinks that I am undervaluing all of the pieces of coaching that we don't see, and that I'm overvaluing the piece that we see, which are, and he's like largely marginalized this to me, thinking that Shanahan doesn't go for it enough on fourth down, which is untrue in terms of like my analysis. My analysis that is that his whole approach to the game changes dramatically when he has a lead, which causes him to make bad decisions down when he's in that situation. And the data that you put together, and I encourage people to go to your Twitter handle, which is, I'm sorry, what's your Twitter handle, just so everyone knows it?
It's GREERRE NFL.
So very easy to remember.
Yeah.
We'll put that in the
Yeah,
show notes if you
write
want.
it down.
Yeah,
Search it,
very
you'll find
very
it.
easy to remember. Catchy also. So if tell us a little bit the work that you did there and what it means to you. And then it looks like you dove in a little bit further on it too, to try to understand like what is the root cause
Mhm.
of how this is happening. It's pretty fascinating because of the work across the coaches. So describe that, and then maybe we can talk a little bit more specifically about Shanahan.
Yeah, yeah. So I think, the impetus for this was, you hear a lot about Shanahan in late game situations. And
If you listen to this podcast, you hear a lot about it.
yeah. My initial question was like, all right, well, is this, kind of, he's had some collapses in high profile games, because he absolutely has, right?
Yeah.
And we've built this narrative that he's not good late, or is there actually data that we can look at to either, I wouldn't say confirm it, but just see, like, has this been true, right? Is he not as good of a coach late in the game? And so what I did was I looked at the win probability in game on every single play, and then binned that, and then looked at, for each of those, what was the actual win percentage. So if you were totally average, totally as expected, you would expect that to be a straight line, right? So if you're up by 10 and the win probability model says you're 75% chance to win, you should win 75% of those games.
Right.
And what you see is the coaches that win a lot have this like nice lift above that line. And it forms this like nice arc where at every level they're winning more games than you might expect just looking at this win probability model. When you look at Shanahan's curve, it has this like reverse S, right? So when he's behind, it looks like he's a really good coach, just like, Belichick, Tomlin, all these other coaches that are in that thread. And he has this nice lift. And then, right around 50%, it flattens out. And then above 50%, it actually dips below. And so what that says is that based on this model, Shanahan wins fewer games than you would expect when he's up, right? So that was kind of the initial analysis, which seemed to confirm this narrative that he is, not a good coach late. I would frame it more as his history is that he has not done, that his teams have not done well late, whether that's on him or something else, you can't tell from that chart. And so the next step was really to like try to then back into that. So we know quarterback play is a huge part of team performance. So the next thing I wanted to do was control it for quarterback play. So looked at the same curve, but now only looking at Jimmy Garoppolo and Brock Purdy versus all the other quarterbacks that Shanahan has had. And the line has shifted out more, right? Because those are better quarterbacks. You're going to win more. But the shape stayed the same. And it still had this like pronounced curve in those like in games where he was leading. So that's kind of like, okay, now we're controlling for quarterback and this dynamic still seems to exist. It's a little bit more evidence that maybe there is something going on late. And then after that, like tried to piece together, well, what could it be, right? Could it be some stylistic things? Are they taking more risks and those are backfiring? Are they taking fewer risks and that's backfiring? And the only thing that really stood out there was this like pass versus run propensity. So using another model, which is the pass expectation model. And I should also say all these models are coming from the NFL Faster data set, which if you are doing NFL analytics, you're probably already familiar with, but it's this incredible open source data set managed by this community built on top of NFL play-by-play data. But so there's another model there, which basically says, given the context of the game, what is the probability that the next play will be a pass? And so if you look at that curve, and then you can calculate the pass rate over or under expectation. And so Shanahan is generally going to be running more. So his pass rate over expectation is generally negative across the board. When you look at his pass expectation, his pass rate above or below expectation, it goes even more negative in late games, which said to me, and again, this is like pretty noisy.
No, that makes total sense. Like
Yeah.
that is exactly what I believe is happening.
Yeah.
Case closed. Glad Rufus isn't here to argue about this.
Well, okay, but I will say, like what conclusion can you truly draw from that? Because a part of me wants to say, like, yeah, this guy, he is one of the best like running schemers, running coaches in NFL history. Also very good at designing pass plays as well. His offenses are just generally very efficient. I think he's a fantastic coach, but like his DNA is running, right? And so if you're in this late game situation, like part of me wants to say, yeah, he's just going back to like, I can run to this win. We are that good at running that we can run to this win. And that seems logically flawed. And that would bear out in the data in all the different ways that we talked about. But there's also another part of me that wants to say, Brock and Jimmy are risk-taking quarterbacks, and he has had times where those leads were lost on turnovers from the quarterback, or those quarterbacks made mistakes late that are kind of like inconceivable that a quarterback could make those mistakes. And so part of me also thinks that maybe there's like a trust issue. And what's also very interesting is if you look at that curve, this pass propensity curve for like a Belichick, it goes up late in game, right? So his pass rate goes up more when they're leading, pass rate versus expectation. And so part of me thinks that like, hey, yeah, that's an easy decision for a coach to make when you've got Tom Brady. And so again, is this the things that we don't see going on behind closed doors? And Shanahan's looking at his team and he's saying like, I don't really trust Jimmy late in the game to make this throw on 3rd and 8. So I'm going to be conservative. I don't really trust Brock late in the game to make this throw on 3rd and 8. So I'm going to be conservative. So I think it's really hard to understand exactly why all this is happening, but this is a long way of saying that the data seems to confirm what people are saying about Shanahan.
I mean, my take on this, and on the Brock Jimmy thing, I think it was really easy to use Jimmy as the crutch here for a while, where you kind of said he does not have an elite quarterback. I think Brock is an elite quarterback personally.
I would agree
from a skill set perspective. So I don't think he's the reason anymore. And ultimately, the run pass expectancy thing does not surprise me because my feeble, primitive mind on this would say the running works well when no one when there's an expectation that you might pass, but the running starts to work a lot worse when people know that you're going to run, right? And so if he keeps zagging when people think he's going to be zagging, if he starts zigging, I would think like, and again, this comes down to a lot of loss aversion, a lot of like understanding. Like I would say the loss aversion, the risk aversion probably plays into this even more because it doesn't allow him to think about and draw. And I would venture to say he's probably running more conservative. Although I don't know if that's true. Like he's obviously running the same kind of running plays, like to some degree. So yeah, anyways, it's fascinating. I appreciate that. And I appreciate that work. And we will be sure to follow you more on that. Anyways, where can people see your work?
Mainly on Twitter. I think Twitter for me is a nice balance of, some real analytics that I do from time to time, and then a lot of more troll analytics posts.
Nice.
I like to keep it light and fun.
Post.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Which I think some people like get confused by and don't always know when I'm like, joking around and saying something.
People say the same thing about Elon too. People don't know when he's joking around.
Well, one that anytime you talk about quarterbacks, it really ignites something in people. And my favorite one recently has been the Patrick Mahomes air yards and how like, oh, he's just a check down artist now. I actually, and like, he's always benefited from a ton of yards after the catch. I think his yak generation is very different than other quarterbacks who are, quote unquote scheme merchants. But it is very fun to talk about him in the same light as like, oh yeah, he's just like Jimmy Garoppolo.
Yeah,
Great,
he's going
great
to go down as
scheme.
a big system quarterback,
Yeah.
probably. Yeah. Best
And I'm
system
also a
quarterback.
Patriots fan, so I don't mind throwing a little shade towards the potential next GOAT. Long way to
Yeah.
go. But then otherwise,
Not that long. I mean, he's pretty damn good. So
yeah, he is. It's a little scary. I haven't been this scared since probably Peyton, but
awesome.
yeah, he's good. He's
All
good.
right. Well, Robbie, thanks so much for joining us. We'll probably have you on again sometime when Rufus is around because I'm sure he'd love to get into these conversations with you. But thank you, and everyone should follow your work.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Really, really enjoyed this combo.